Welcome to the Freebirth podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
Today on the show, we have Jessyl, who after a hospital birth said never again and free-birthed her second child in her home in Italy and then her most recent baby in Virginia. Jessyl talks about being a military family and navigating free birthing on base. She also shares how she dealt with her nervous husband and the actions she took to step outside the system, one birth at a time.
So with my first pregnancy, we were just 3 months into our marriage. I did not want kids for a few years. So it was definitely unexpected. My husband had gone to the doctor to get his semen tested. I don't know why, because we never spoke about it. He comes back and tells me, the doctor tells me I'm only 19% fertile, and it would be really, really hard for me to ever have kids.
Wait, 19?
Yes. And
that
I was
is
like,
so
well,
specific.
Yeah. Well, he had like the whole lab work, like drawn up, everything. Like he actually did the lab. Yeah. And I was just like, well, 19 is a lot. It's not zero. I was like, so there's still a chance.
Huh.
But after that, he knew we had been in Afghanistan prior to that and for a year.
Because he's in the service. Oh, you both were in the service?
Yes.
Oh.
I was as well.
Is that how you met?
Yes, that is how we met.
Oh, wow.
So after he left, I got off my birth control because that was kind of where I started, I guess, heading towards a more natural, way of life. And I knew that the birth control was bad and all that. So I was like, since you're not going to be here, I'm getting off my birth control.
Sure. And how old were you at this part in your life?
I was 22.
Okay. So you're pretty young.
Yeah.
You got married, and he must have, for some reason, had it in his head. Because that's kind of unusual. I'm trying to think, like, maybe he had some, story in his head that he was sterile or something.
Yeah, and he was like, I just feel like I'm not. And I asked him, I was like, but what makes you think that? I was like, we're not even trying to have kids.
Huh.
I was like, what are you doing? And so then he knew I wasn't on birth control and all that. And kind of like after that, he started not being careful. We were using the pull-out method. And after that, he was just like, whatever, careless. He's like, oh, you won't get pregnant. You won't get pregnant.
He's like, I'm going to put my 19% to work.
Exactly. And I think it was, like I said, it was like 3 months after we got married. My periods were very clockwork. I always got them at the same time. I missed it. And I was like, I'll give it a few days. And after the few days, it didn't come. And I was like, okay, I need to buy a pregnancy test because I just need to know.
Yeah, of course.
Bought the pregnancy test. And I saw it was a digital one and it says pregnant. And I just bawl out crying because it wasn't expected. I didn't know what to do. I felt so lost. I was like, I don't even know how to be a mother. Like, how am I going to do this? So I cried, and I didn't tell him until the next day because I told him and he thought I was joking. And I was just like, okay, I'll just pee on another stick and show him.
And is he home at this point, or is he still somewhere else?
We were both home.
Okay.
We were both home at this point. So he's just working his regular 9 to or 8 to 3, whatever job. He comes home and I'm like, I was like, and I show him the stick and he's like, he's looking at me confused. And I was like, well, it's mine. I didn't have anybody else pee on it.
You're like, just to be clear, it's your baby, dude.
Yeah. I was like, this came out of me. Like, this is my pee, because he's looking at me like confused, like, well, whose is it? And I'm like, me.
Oh my God. So
we were both very overwhelmed by the news since it was something so unexpected. And so that's where that started. And then I didn't know anything about like home births, none of that. So we go, okay, so we need to go to the hospital. Since he's in the Navy, we go to the on-base hospital, San Diego Balboa, start our prenatal visits. They do the first appointment, the urine test, all that. And I was like, this is, what everybody does. You go to the hospital, you see an OB, and this is it. And I want to say I was it was either 7 or 8 months pregnant. An aunt of mine was going through nursing school, and they had her watch The Business of Being Born. And she tells me, hey, you need to see this documentary. Like, I wish I would have seen this 20 years ago before having my kids.
Hold on. They showed that doc in nursing school?
I don't know. Yeah, she was in Reading, Pennsylvania, and she said that it was part of her, like, nursing program to watch that documentary.
Dang, that's cool.
And that's what I thought, too. After I saw it, I was like, well, that was pretty cool.
Well, because there's, like, a whole part in that movie that, like, is dogging on nurses.
Yes.
Huh. Cool. Okay. Carry on.
So she tells me about that, and I was like, okay. And I remember I already had my big belly. So, like I said, I was around 7 to 8 months pregnant. I told my husband, hey, my aunt says we really should watch this. So let's put it on one night. So we put it on, and after I watched that, I'm like, I can't do this hospital birth. I'm like, no, there's no way. I was like, I need to have a home birth.
Yeah.
And I started trying to find centers and midwives and calling them. I think I was maybe 34, 36, because I remember that they told me that I was too far along and that nobody would take me at that point. So after I called a few places and they denied me, and then of course the insurance is like, well, we don't cover that, which they do to a certain extent, but you have to jump through hoops and things. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to go through all that trouble now. So I was like, okay. So then we decided, I was like, well, I'm staying at home to the last possible moment. I said, my water breaks, I'm not running to the hospital. I said, whatever happens, I am staying at home to the last minute possible. I want the least intervention. The same aunt that told me about the documentary had my grandma fly out so she could help me, since it was my first time having a baby. And she flew her out about 2 weeks before my supposed due date. So she was there when I started labor and all that. And it started at 12 a.m. and it started by emptying of the bowels. Like, I was using the bathroom every 10 minutes. Like, I could not stop. That went on for about 3 hours. And when my husband's alarm goes off to go to work, he said, well, should I go? And I was like, yes. I was like, we're staying here to the last possible moment. I said,
I will call you when there's a head.
I was like, this is a normal day. I said, go to work. I will call you when I need you. And he's like, well, you sure? I was like, yes, I'm sure. Just go to work. Because he had me call the hospital before he left, because he was freaking out, anxious about. He's like, well, how are you gonna know? And I didn't know. And I was like, I'm just gonna know. I was like, I think I'm gonna know when the baby's coming. I'm like, just go to work. But he had me call the hospital, and the nurse, of course, they say the whole, when you're having a minute contraction every 5 minutes for X amount of time. And I was like, yeah, that's not happening yet. So go to work. And I was random, but I was selling this bed from IKEA that morning to this guy that I had been trying to sell the bed for a few days. And it happened that that's the morning that he can go. So it's about 9 a.m. now. And I had been trying to call my husband. He works on a ship. He's in the Navy. So he doesn't always have service. So I keep trying to call him. It's not going through. So I'm sending him messages. And finally I get through to him. And he's like, well, what exactly is going on? And I was like, well, my contractions have been hitting, back to back. I've lost my mucus plug at this point, everything. And I was like, it's getting to the point that I cannot tolerate them any longer. I think it's go time. So he's like, okay. And they won't, for some reason, his immediate supervisors don't want to let him go. They're like, no, you're staying on the ship.
What?
So, yeah, this is welcome to the Navy, military life. They don't care if your wife is in labor. They really don't. So he goes to the corpsmen, which is like the people who work for the hospital, basically, on his ship, and say, hey, I'm coming to you guys with this information because my immediate supervisor thinks that, like, my wife isn't going to have the baby now. And I want you to tell them that she is. So he asked me, he's like, how far apart are your contractions? And I had the app. So I'm telling him, I'm like, I think by that point, they were 3 minutes apart for about 45 seconds to 60 seconds. And it had already been happening for like 30 minutes, 45, maybe an hour. But at this point, I'm already in labor for 9 hours. So I was like, I know it's getting close. And I could feel it. So he's like, you know what? I don't care. They told me that you're in active labor and I need to go. I'm leaving. I don't care if I get in trouble. So he just leaves the ship and comes home. When he comes home, I'm like sitting around. He's like, what are you waiting for? And I was like, I'm trying to sell this bed. I said, the guy's on his way. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, he's coming from far. I'm not leaving him without the bed. Like, I'm selling this bed before I go to the hospital.
Oh my God.
And my husband looks at me like, I am that shit crazy.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't care what happens. Like, you need to get this bed to this guy. And he's like, all right, just get to the car, okay? He's like, I'll go give him the bed. I said, okay. So I walk out with my grandma, and she had forced me to eat potatoes with like shredded cheese that morning. I did not want to eat, had no want to eat. But she's like, no, you need to eat. You need to eat.
Yeah.
You can't go like. And so I forced it down, and as soon as I left, I didn't know it was transition.
Oh my God.
I threw up twice. I had hit transition. Like, I know that now, but at the time I was like, I don't know why the hell I'm throwing up. I guess it just didn't sit well with me.
You're just like, why do I have food poisoning in the middle of labor? This is unfair.
I was like, why am I throwing up? This is ridiculous. So I get in the car, and my husband calls me. I'm like, what is he calling me for now? And he's like, I'm locked outside the building, because the building had 2 doors, one to the parking lot, one to the front entrance where he went to sell the bed. And he's like, I forgot my keys. You need to come back. And I'm like, I didn't want to walk. And my grandma, she's a little too old, so I couldn't send her. So I was like, I need to go. So I'm waddling back. Got to go through the one door, go to the other door, walk back to the car. And when we get to the car, my husband goes into his pocket and pulls out the keys to open the car. And he's just pale white. Like, he is so anxious, so stressed out right now. He gets in the car. And I start laughing. And he's like, why are you laughing? And I'm like, the keys were in your pocket the whole time. And he's like, I can't think straight right now. I can't think straight. And I was like, should we call an ambulance? Or are you okay to drive?
Oh, I thought you said we did call. I was like, no.
No. I was like, I don't want you driving if you're going to wreck right now. I was like, I'd rather go in an ambulance.
You're like, I'll drive my own driving.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to. I was like, this is serious right now, and I don't want you driving under these conditions.
I just got
He's
this
like, I'm fine.
I just got this image of you like driving yourself and then asking for a stretcher for your husband when you show up.
So he's like, I'm fine. I was like, okay then. So we head to the hospital. It was about a 10-15 minute drive, but it felt like, an hour, and the bumps were ridiculous. And we get to the hospital. And I'm pretty calm. Like, I'm still very calm at this point. It's about 10:20 or 10:30. And as soon as I get there, the whole wheelchair. Oh, she needs a wheelchair. She needs a wheelchair. I'm looking at, I was like, I can walk. They're like, no, you need to sit on her wheelchair. I said, okay, then. So I sit on their wheelchair, and they wheel me in. And the nurses, they're all busy at the front desk. Like, nobody's even paying attention to us right now. There's about 5 nurses at the desk, and they wheel me in, and nobody's even looking at us. And it took us about a minute until we're like, excuse me, how does this work? Like, where do we check in? And they're like, oh, right here. What's the problem? And he's like, well, my wife's in labor. And they're like, oh, well, she looks okay to me. And I said, I've been in labor since 12 a.m., and I'm pretty sure I'm close to having the baby. They're like, well, you look okay. And in my head, I'm like, well, how the hell does looking okay mean anything to where my body is on having this baby right now?
Wow.
But I was like, after that, I was like, I'm not talking. So they wheel me into the room where they, do their checks, and the nurses are asking me 1,000 questions, and I'm having contractions, and they continue, and they're looking at me like, we're waiting for a response. And at that point, like, I started getting very frustrated and irritated. Oh, and when I was at home, I hit a point where I was like, why can't I just stay here and have this baby? Like, why do I even need to go to the hospital? And I was like, I've never done, like, I didn't know anything about free birth. And I was like, that's just crazy. And I was like, if I do this, my grandma's going to freak out. So I was like, let me just go to the hospital. And so at that point, I was like, I should have just stayed in my bathtub where I was comfortable. I should have never gotten out to head to this hospital. And I look at my husband after a contraction stopped, and I was like, can you answer the questions? I was like, all the answers.
Yeah.
Why is everybody just standing here asking me questions? I was like, answer the questions. And when they checked me, they're like, oh, yeah, this baby's coming. You're 9 centimeters.
Oh, my God.
And I was like, I know I was close. But with all that chaos, I felt like labor stopped. It stopped for about 30 to 45 minutes. It started again once they checked me into the next room, and, they tried to strap on all the monitors and all that. And I was like, I don't want them. Like, you guys said that this was a choice when you gave me the hospital tour. I said, I don't want anything on me right now. So they're like, well, we have to do it periodically. It's a protocol. We have to. I got stabbed like about 5 times with the IV because they couldn't find a vein because I was so dehydrated. And I was like, well, do I even need the IV? I said, I don't want to, just stop. And they're like, no, we have to, because in case of an emergency, you have to have the IV. And once again, I was like, okay, fine. After everything calmed down and everybody left me alone, I finally felt like I got back into that space, to begin labor again. And I got into the bathroom. I took off the thing they get, the hospital gown. I was so hot. I didn't want anything on me. So I'm butt naked in the bathroom. And my husband's like, do you really want to be in here? It's really dirty. I said, I don't care. Yes, this is where I want to be right now. I said, I want to be in the bathroom, away from that room, away from everybody coming in and bothering me. So I was laboring using the handicap bars they have in the hospitals, and like between sitting on the toilet and that. And at one point I was squatting, holding onto the bar in the bathroom, and the nurse comes in and she's like, are you pushing? And I said, sort of. Because I got so mad at myself for even telling her, because in my head I was like, I'm going to have this baby. I'm never going to call them into the room.
Totally.
But once she caught me like that, she's like, you need to come back in here and we need to call the midwife. And I was like, I really don't want to go back to the bed. She's like, you need to. And at that point she starts bending down to like pick me up and starts moving me into the room.
Whoa.
So they moved me onto the bed, and I asked them if I could get the squat bar, which they get for me. And, the whole coach pushing, begins and all that. And after about 5-10 minutes, I could no longer squat. My legs gave out. So I go back to the reclined, position of giving birth in a hospital.
Yeah. And
here they are holding my legs back, coaching me to push. And I feel like what I'm doing is useless. I feel like I'm putting all this strength and I'm pushing so hard, but nothing's happening other than what my body actually wants to do on its own time. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, why are they having me push so hard when I can clearly feel that my body's the one pushing the baby out? So baby is born, and before that, my water breaks. And when my water breaks, they see meconium. They're like, oh, we need to call the pediatric team. So now there's about 20 people in our room.
Damn.
And so the baby comes out, and I had known a little bit about, more natural. So I wanted like the delayed cord clamping. I didn't want vaccines, any of that. Like, I still wasn't even sure. I was on the fence. I didn't know at that time why. It didn't feel right to me. So I was like, I don't want it. But I didn't have my reasons exactly as to why necessarily.
Nor should you have to.
Yeah. But at the time, that's where I sat. And so they immediately cut the cord. They take him over to his table, and I didn't see any of this because now I'm dealing with nurses and midwife, we need to birth your placenta and blah, blah, blah. And my husband tells me that, they suctioned him. So they like stuck the tube straight down his throat to suction him. And I'm just sitting there like with tears coming down my face because all I want to do is hold my baby. Like I had like this, and I'm like crying. I'm just like, I just want my baby. Like, I want my baby right now. And then the nurse comes up to me. She's like, we need to deliver your placenta now. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, we need to give you the shot of Pitocin. I know you don't want it, but baby's out. You need to get it now, or else you're going to hemorrhage, bleed to death. And I hadn't looked into birthing that far. Like I thought what she said was true. So I said, yes, of course, because I don't want to bleed to death. I don't want to die on this table. I want my baby. So I said yes to the shot of Pitocin, and and the nurse, massages the placenta out. It was extremely painful. And they deliver my placenta. And I want to say it was after 10 minutes, maybe 15, they finally bring the baby back to me. And at that point, I was crying with my arm reached out saying, I want to hold my baby. I want to hold my baby. And they finally, and we didn't know the sex. I didn't want to know the sex. So I didn't know if it was a boy or girl yet. They lay him on my chest, and I'm just, in tears, like taking it all in, that I finally get to hold my baby and looking at him. And I want to say about 5 minutes went by before I was like, wait, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. So I look under the blanket because they had placed the blanket over him and myself so we can do skin to skin. And I was like, oh, it's a boy. And I was very excited about that. And, they they make you pee before you leave that room. Like they're like, you have to pee, and the whole hospital procedure thing. They move us into the next room, and the next day when we saw the day doctors, well, first of all, the whole overnight thing of them taking the baby every so often and asking me, are you feeding him? Are you waking him? Are you doing this? Are you doing that? And in my head, I'm like, but why do I need to do all that? Like, the baby's here. He's sleeping. I'm sleeping. Like, why do I need to wake him? They're like, you need to be feeding him every 2 hours. And, to me, it didn't make sense. I was like, well, if baby wants to sleep, like, let the baby sleep. Tomorrow, I'm sure it's going to be a different way. Like, he just went through a lot. I just went through a lot. Like, we both need our rest.
Right. And there's no place for mother's intuition birthing in captivity when everyone is experiencing you and your baby as on the brink of disaster.
Yes. And, so I'm kind of like confused and annoyed because I don't, at the time, I didn't have like the strength to stand up for myself or the information even to back up what felt right to me. So I'm just kind of like, okay, very submissive to this all. And the next day the doctor comes in and, of course she's like, well, why did you want to get him vaccinated? And he goes into the whole Hep B vaccine thing. And I'm just like, no. And he's like, well, is your grandmother vaccinated? She needs to go get her up to date on all her vaccines that she's going to be around the baby. And my grandma's like, tell him that I've never gotten those vaccines and I will never get those vaccines in my life. And I of course, I didn't tell that to the doctor because I was like, I don't feel like going down that road with him right now. But I was just like, okay, she will. I was like, she will. And they finally, we got released the next day in the afternoon. And I finally go home, and he was definitely the toughest baby I had. Like, there was hourly wake ups, screaming all the time. And there's no doubt in my mind that it was the way he was birthed and everything after he was birthed that he struggled so much as a baby. Like, I was seriously sleep deprived with him, which has not happened with my last two. And it's when we remember his babyhood for my husband and I, it's kind of like a horror story.
Right.
Because it was bad. It was really, really bad with him. And the only thing that would calm him was running water. So we would sit in the bathroom for hours at night. I would fall asleep on the toilet, holding him, or in the bathtub with the water filled. Because that was another thing that he loved, was just being in the water. So I would fall asleep, like take naps in the bathtub.
Oh my God.
Whatever we could do to get him to sleep at night, because it was so hard. And then afterwards, I kind of dove into the natural community, after that, finding Facebook groups and things like that. So after him, I told my husband, I will never, ever birth in a hospital again. I said, I refuse to be put in a situation where they make me feel like my body, I can't make choices for my own self, my body and my baby. And I said, I don't agree with that. And I said, and if I go to a hospital, I know I'm going to be fighting them the whole way. And I don't want to fight anyone. I was like, I don't feel like I should be fighting people in this type of situation. Like, I'm in labor, I'm giving birth. I shouldn't have to be like, oh, don't forget this, look at my birth plan.
Right. Been there, done that. Didn't work. Totally sucked. Yeah. Moving on. Yeah.
Yeah. So we moved to Sicily after that. We get orders to move to Sicily, Italy. And 2 weeks after we arrive, I went to the hospital to get an IUD because I didn't want children for at least like another 2-3 years. I had told my husband. And when I go in, they're like, well, is there a possibility of you being pregnant?
Oh my God.
Like, yes. So we do the urine sample, and that was a Friday. On Monday, since we had just arrived to the island, the base hosts this like welcome to Sicily thing, and they take us out to a trip downtown to show us the area, and we dine at a restaurant for lunch, and it was like all you can drink wine, and I'm having a glass of wine, and I get the call from the hospital. So I step outside. And I'm like, yeah, and they're like, so we got your test results back, so it's positive, you're pregnant. And I was like, oh damn.
How old was your son?
He was 16 months.
And did you have any, like, when they said, is there any possibility, you just said yes because of the like inherent possibility?
So when I'm breastfeeding, I don't get periods.
Sure.
I had worked for 2 weeks straight, 8-9 hour days, So I was pumping more than breastfeeding. And that happened twice to me. So I got 2 periods. And on that last period, we had unprotected sex where my husband did not pull out. Mm-hmm. So I knew that the possibility was there.
Wow.
But I wasn't sure. So I was like, I don't know. And I knew that because of that one period, we were in murky waters.
Right. Okay, so you're at the lunch. You're like, oh, my God.
So I go back in, and I'm like, how am I going to tell my husband that he doesn't, like, you know, change his face, and then everybody starts asking us what? So I'm sitting right next to him, and I slowly put the glass next to him. And I'm like, I can't drink that anymore. And he's
wink,
like, okay.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Like, no, he doesn't. He's just like, okay, I'll drink it. And I was like, okay, that's not going to be that easy.
Oh, my God.
So I text him, and I was like, so we're pregnant again. Want to go to the bathroom and talk? He looks at me like, what? So we go to the bathroom. He's like, are you serious? I was like, well, I'm not joking. I was like, yeah, I'm serious. They just called me from the hospital right now. And he starts like freaking out again. I'm like, okay, we've done this once. We know it's not that bad. We can do this again. I said, we got this, right? And he's like, I need to think this through. Like he gets so nervous at the thought of having a child. I don't know what it is. So he kind of calms down a little bit in the bathroom. He comes back out. And by the next day, he's like, okay, all right, now I'm excited. We're having a baby.
Sure. I mean, not expecting it is a big deal. That's a big deal.
So once again, this time I tell him, you know, we're doing this at home. We're going to have a, you know, midwife and all this. So I start with the hospital thing all over again. So I go back to the hospital, you know, go through their procedures. And the first doctor visit, I was like, so I want to have a home birth. I want to have a midwife. They're like, we don't do that here. That's not allowed.
Duh.
And I just sat there like, crap. So for the next 20 weeks, I keep doing the same thing. I go to my appointments, you know, I'm just like, I declined like certain things. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing this. And of course they're all mad about it because how dare I say no to procedures and things. And I want to say it was about 30 weeks. I had been watching a lot of hypnobirthing videos on YouTube, and this Freebirth came up, which at the time I didn't know it was a free birth. It's just this woman giving birth at a creek, like behind her house or something, with a yoga mat.
Mm-hmm. She's like from New Zealand or something.
Yeah, it's something like that. And she has like all her babies around, and you can hear her husband there.
He's filming,
and
right?
And I watched her give birth, and I'm like, that is totally what I wanted to do with my first. Wait, people actually do this?
Hell yeah.
So that's kind of where and then I was like, wait a minute. And then I think I started reading the comments, or something popped up that said Freebirth. So I start YouTubing Freebirth videos, and I'm like, holy snap, wait, this is a thing? I was like, women give birth by themselves on purpose? And I told my husband, I was like, look at these women. They're giving birth by themselves at home. No doctors, no midwives, nothing. I'm like, this is what I'm freaking doing. And he's like, that's just crazy. You're not doing that. He's like, you're going to the hospital. So I kind of sat with it for a few weeks, and you know, the whole pack your hospital bag by, 35 weeks or whatever. So in case you have to run to the hospital, it's ready. So I had taken out a few things and put it on top of my son's dresser, but I could never put it in the suitcase. Like it was just sitting there. And every time I would go in his room, I would look at it, and I'm just like, no, like putting it in the suitcase, and I would leave. And every day it was like a reminder of everything I went through with him.
Exactly.
I couldn't get myself to just put it in the suitcase and close it, because to me, that was telling myself I'm going to the hospital.
Right, totally. And was there any, regarding that conversation of your man being like, no, you're going, was there any like tension around that, or were you just like totally unconcerned with his stance on it?
I let it go at the time. I was like, I'm going to let him sit with it, and I'm going to sit with it. So I started reaching out to my more like crunchy mamas and asking them like, hey, do you know anybody who's free birthed, who's done this before? One of his biggest issues was the whole legality behind it. He thought it would be like illegal, or his insurance wouldn't cover us if we were to do something like that.
A common
fear.
I
said, yeah. So I was like, you know what? I will look into it. And when I have answers for him, we will sit down and talk about this. So I asked one of my friends who was still back in San Diego, and she happened to have a friend who also has a Navy spouse. and she had a free birth. And so she puts me in contact with her, and she adds me to some free birth groups. And of course I start asking all my questions. And my biggest concern was we were on base housing overseas. And I was like, I do not want to get in trouble for this. And of course I don't want to get my husband in trouble for this. And, I started Googling. I can't find anything that says that he will. Well, in Googling, I find this post that had been already like 3 years old about the same thing. I think her spouse was Army, and they were in Germany, and she had a free birth. So I messaged her, and I was like, hey, I know this is super random, but I want to have a free birth on base, and I'm just freaking out. Like, we're afraid of what. And she's like, oh, no, there's nothing illegal about it. Like, you can go ahead, do it. Like, she gave me like the whole, and I was like, okay, I'm doing this.
Cool.
And that's when I went back to my husband. I was like, look, there's nothing illegal about this. Like, this is happening. This is how we're going to have this baby. I'm not going to the hospital. And he's like, oh, you're still going to the hospital. I was like, well, you know what? You go ahead and try and put me in a car and take me to the hospital while I'm in labor and see how well that goes for you. And he just looks at me like, okay. So I think it's like a week or two after that, he's like, so what do I need to know to do this? And I said, oh, okay, now you're on page. I was like, now we're on the same page.
And I want to pause there for a second, because this is such a common, this is such a common dynamic. And we hear from women literally every day who are aligning with their truth to do this, often based in previous hospital trauma and knowing, wholeheartedly what they do not want to repeat. And then the husband or partner, even if they saw the abuse and saw the aftermath of it, still are like, no. And what I just want to kind of bring attention to around your story is that wasn't the end of it for you. And you didn't all of a sudden turn this into, how do I get my how do I get my partner comfortable? How do I get him on board and center your plans around him? But rather what I'm hearing is that you got feisty, you got clear, and you said, this is what's happening. And what I hear consistently in so many stories is that then the partner's like, okay, and exactly what you just said. Like, what do I need to know? And then, and then after the free birth, those are the dads that are just like the most proud and the most all about it.
Exactly.
And so, I hope anyone that's listening right now that has a partner who's like, yeah, no, that's not the answer. That's not the end of it. If this is your truth and you don't want, to let your partner dictate a repeat, traumatic experience, which will on some level affect your relationship.
Yes.
Right. How could it not? Take responsibility for yourself. And I love that. I just wanted to pause there, because what I see consistently is women who are truly aligned with free birth, they do it no matter what. And then on the other side, I see, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that's the way I see it, is like, he doesn't have to live with whatever happened in the hospital. I did. And I was like, I had to process all that. I had to deal with it, not him.
Yeah. Yeah.
They go home and they get to love on a new baby, and I'm still sitting here like, what the hell just happened?
Right. Totally. Yeah. And I think, I think it kind of can go a step further for some women who are like saying things like, oh, I just had someone yesterday message me saying my husband won't allow me to free birth, but I really want to. And I sat with it. And, of course I always try to be super loving and gentle with that, because I get those messages a lot. But at the same time, a part of me is like, you don't really want that. You don't actually want a free birth, because I do think a lot of women use their partners as a scapegoat for actually not taking responsibility, for what they say they want, right?
Correct. I feel the same way. I was like, if I want to do something, nobody's going to stop me from doing that. I'm going to do it.
Especially something that isn't needed to have anyone else there. Like, yes, of course, we want our partners there most of the time. I loved having my husband with me, but ultimately no one could argue that I needed my husband, nor did
Correct.
You, because this is a biological experience that, occurs with or without the baby daddy there. It just does, the partner doesn't have to be there. you know, I think about this all the time because it's fairly controversial, as you see in our groups, you know, to like dare to say that you can even do it without your partner if your partner is not supportive.
I definitely felt like that during my first birth because I have this memory of him and my grandmother standing in the bathroom doorway looking at me with this faces of pity and like pain. And I looked up at them and I said, you two go sit in the furthest corner of the room and don't come back looking at me with those faces.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I'm not dying. I'm having a baby. And they sat in the corner for the rest of the time.
Good.
And I felt so mean, but I felt like it was so necessary because I was like, I need them to get out of here. Like, every time I look up, they look at me like I'm dying.
No, totally.
Like, I'm dying.
Yes. And thank God you had enough of your own, you know, fire and internal resources, because I have seen a furrowed brow, you know, on the team totally throw a mother off. And so,
yes.
You know, it's you're 100% right to say that. I mean, you know, like people, yeah, I talk with partners about it a lot. Like, I don't care if you're nervous, you need to look like you're not.
Yes.
And
exactly.
if you're nervous, you can pull me outside and talk to me about it, but you have a game face on. Like that needs to happen.
That was actually one of the things I told my husband for my second birth was I was like, that face, you better change it. Whatever you do. I said, I don't want to see that face again, that I'm dying.
Totally.
Like,
you're like, I
don't
might,
do it again.
Yeah, maybe I am energetically dying, but that's none of your concern.
Yeah. I was like, you better have a happy face that we're about to have a baby. I said, I don't want to see that. Oh my goodness, my wife is in so much pain face.
Totally. And the like feeling sorry for you. Okay, so let's go back. So he's like, okay, what do I need to know?
Yeah, so then at that point I was like, okay, well, I'll send you articles, you know, I'll keep you up to date with what I'm reading, whatever fears you have. I was like, let me know so I can help out with that, you know, and I'll find answers with you so we can get past this. And his biggest fear was at the end was hemorrhage. Yeah. He's like, I'm afraid that the baby's going to be born or not, and you're just going to start bleeding out, and I'm not going to know what to do, and you're both just going to die on me.
Totally.
And I was like, okay, first of all, let's not go in with that mindset. I said, nobody's dying. I'm going to be having a baby, okay? And I was like, and second of all, if it does happen, like I already knew about, you know, the whole placenta in the cheek or this, that. I said, if the baby is born, you know, we can just cut the cord early. I can suck it. If the placenta is born, I can stick a piece, you know, of placenta in my cheek. I was like, but, you know, it doesn't matter. I said, and if you're really that nervous, you know, the ambulance is a phone call away. I was like, but I will know if I'm losing too much blood. He's like, well, how can you know? And I was like, well, what happens when you lose too much blood? I was like, you feel weak, you know, you feel like you're about to faint, you know, all the signs of blood loss. And I said, so as long as I feel fine, it doesn't matter how much blood is on the floor. It shouldn't be an issue. So we finally got past that. And then he kind of started telling our neighbors, which I wasn't comfortable enough to let people know that that's what I was doing, because especially in the Navy, like people tend to be very, very mainstream. And I was like, I don't want anybody questioning this. I don't want anybody like, oh, she's crazy, or like trying to tell somebody what I'm doing. Because in Sicily where we were, it's a very, very small community because the base is tiny. So there's not a lot of people, kind of like everybody knows everybody, or everybody knows somebody who knows that person. You know what I'm saying? So I was like, I don't want people to go around talking about me doing this. But he told our neighbors across the street, which the wife, I think both of them, or the wife used to be a corpsman, which basically they work in the hospital. And, you know, she's crazy. Like, she's putting your baby in danger. She's putting herself in danger. But they would never say it to my face. They would always say, like, when they were talking to him. And I was like, and I got upset with him. I was like, look, I know that this is what we're doing, but we don't need to talk about this to anybody. I was like, this is our business. Nobody needs to know what's going down. And I said, when, you know, the day that I go into labor, I was like, I don't want anybody in the house. I don't want you calling people over here. I said, it's you, me, and our son, Grayson, who was 2. He was just a little bit past 2 because his birthday was November and I was due in December. So I was like, it should just be us 3 in the house. That's it. So finally, the day comes. I had been in his office and I had my older son laying on my stomach taking a nap. And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And he was getting to wrap up, but he still had a few things to do in the office. So I was like, I'm going to head home, you know, and start preparing dinner and whatever, and I'll catch you at home. And he's like, okay. So I started getting like cramps, and I thought it was just for my son laying on my belly because I was so big at the time. I was like, oh, that must have just not felt right. But as I'm driving home, they continue. And I was like, okay, this isn't cramps. I think it's finally showtime. And so I get home and I just proceed like a normal day. Like I started making food and cleaning up and whatever. And I want to say he got home around 5 or 5:30. And I was like, yeah, so I've been in labor the last, 2 hours. It's still there. He's like, what? Why didn't you call me? And that's because it just started and there's nothing going on. I was like, it's just, the same thing. Like it's an accordion. We just have to ride out the waves, I was like, what was the point of me calling you, getting you to run here? I'm fine. And I continued, like I started cleaning up any last minute baby things I forgot to do. I started doing them and I continued to do that till about 7:30, 8 o'clock. That's finally when I was like, okay, I can no longer function. I need to go upstairs, carve out my space. And I still didn't know where in the house I wanted to birth. Nothing had like called out to me. So I was like, I'll just leave it for the day of and set it up. So what I felt like doing was the bathroom upstairs, the guest bathroom. I had a tub and I was like, oh, I'll try to see if I have a water birth, if the bathtub feels good. So I set up my salt lamp and I set up a video camera because I wanted to video it. And I had some pillows and the chuck pads and towels and I set everything up and my water bottle. And I was like, all right, let's just relax in here. And at one point I went to the bedroom to lay down. And after like 30 minutes, I no longer felt comfortable. So I went back to the bathroom. And I got in the bathtub in the water. And as soon as I was in there, like the bathtub was very, very narrow. I was like, I can't even open my legs here if I wanted to. And I felt so constricted and uncomfortable. I was like, screw the water birth. We're going back to land. So I get out.
You're like, I'll get it on the next time.
Yeah. So I was like, and the water felt very soothing and I love being in the water. So that's what called me to do a water birth because it did feel very, very good. But I was like, it's fine. I was like, it's not a big deal. Let's go back to the towels. So I rocked the waves, wave by wave. And at this time, like I'm actually so much more in tune with my body, versus when I was like in the hospital
of course.
And being distracted every 10 minutes. Like now I'm just feeling my body, like I can literally feel my body opening up and everything happening. And I'm just breathing through it all. And I feel so relaxed and so good. And I'm just like, this is amazing. Like this is what it should always feel like. And I remember reading something that they're like, when you're in labor, just think of everything being loose and opening. And once I hit transition and the waves were really rocking my body, I remember like doors opening, flowers opening, cervix opening, mouth. Yeah, like I'm telling myself that in my head. I'm like, just imagine things opening because it's going to help me dilate and everything else go smoother. So I'm there just thinking about all that. And my husband kept coming up to check on me, which was extremely distracting because my son was downstairs. And I had wanted him to be there at that birth. But he had just like figured out what blood was. And he had freaked out a few times after seeing blood. And my husband's like, I think that's a terrible idea. Like, he's just going to freak out. So at the time I was like, okay, fine. We'll just keep him downstairs. But I was like, I want him to come up and see the baby, like as soon as the baby's born. So he was downstairs entertaining him and he had a movie on. And at one point I remember my husband came up and he had his shoes on and it was just like bugging me. And I was like, why the heck did he come upstairs with his shoes on?
Into my sacred birth space.
Yes, I was like, it's so clean up here. Yeah. And he's going to come with his dirty shoes up here. And I was like, could you just take your shoes off? I was like, I don't know why it's bothering me, but it is. He's like, okay, I'm sorry. So he takes his shoes off. He leaves again. And
tell me he did not leave the shoes.
I think he took the shoes. I don't even remember because I was so close to crowning. Like I knew he took them off and I was just like, whatever. And then I'm like so close to crowning and I hear the front door close and I'm like, what the fuck was that? And he comes back upstairs and I had the window open because once again, I feel like a furnace and I'm burning up. And he closes the window. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, open the window. And like, that's all I could like get out at the time. And he's like, oh, the baby's about to be born. I don't want it to get like all cold with the draft because it's December, so it is cold. And I was like, I don't care. And I couldn't say anything, but in my head, I'm like, I don't give a crap. Yeah. Open the freaking window. And all I could say was, Alexander! And he's like, okay. And he like comes back in and opens the window again. And I was just like, okay, I'm cooling down again. And right after that, the head was born. And he leaves again for something. He comes back up, and I was like, the head's already out.
Wait, I want to picture it. Where exactly are you and in what position?
So I'm in the bathroom, and I'm holding on to the side of the tub. I'm kind of like crouched down, like kind of like a squat crouch. Mm-hmm. And my bathroom's dark. Everything's pitch black. All of the salt lamp. And I have some hypnobirthing music in the background. Mm-hmm. And it's like a tiny little hallway. So he kind of like just pops his head into the right every time. Like, how are you doing? Are you okay? And then he goes back downstairs to go be with my son. Mm-hmm. So at this point, the head is already out. And I'm just crouching there. He comes back up, and I was like, the head's already out. He's like, okay, let me go check on Grayson real quick. And like, the baby's gonna be born, like, any second now. But he, like, runs back downstairs, and he comes back in time just as I'm birthing the body. And I just kind of let him fall out because I couldn't let go of the tub. And I was so close to the floor, and it was very heavily padded. So I just let the baby be born. And he is by far the most emotional, like, rush of oxytocin I've had. And he is my very emotional child. Like, it was so unlike me. Like, I just broke down in tears, and like, I couldn't talk. And I was just like, my baby! Like, in my head, I was just like, why do I feel like this? And I was just like, well, I just had a baby, duh. But like, I was like, this is so unlike me. And now I see it, like, it's him. Like, that is who he is. Aww. Like, he is my over-the-top emotional child.
That's
everything
so cute.
is extra. Mm-hmm. I was like, I call him my little spice.
That's so sweet.
But yeah, it was crazy. Like, it was just so overpowering when he was born. And he came out, like, as soon as he was born, he was like crying right away. And my husband's like, is he okay? Is he okay? Like, he's still freaking out at the point that we just did this in our bathroom.
Totally.
He's like, is he okay? Like, what is going on?
He's like, can I close the window now?
Yeah, he was like, can I close the window? He did. He's like, can I close the window now? And I was like, yeah, you can close it. I was like, I don't care now. I was like, baby's here.
I wonder did you ever give him shit about leaving once the head was out? I wonder what his, like, mental reasoning.
Oh, I told him, well, that it's going to come why he did that. So I'm squatting there, and the placenta came out 2 minutes. And I know this because of my video. I like timed it from the time he was born to when, and it was literally 2 minutes. The placenta came right out. And I was like, oh, well, that was easy. I was like, literally didn't even have time to think about it before it was birthed. And he was like, is that the placenta? Cool. I was like, yeah, that's the placenta. Mm-hmm. So, after that, you know, I cuddled with, he's like, take your bra off so you can breastfeed. Like, he was more aware of this than I was. Like, I would have just sat there with my bra on. Mm-hmm. And I thought about it too. I was like, why was I even wearing a bra? So he helps me out of that. And I want to say I breastfeed for a little bit. I can't really recall. But then afterwards, he sits down with the baby, skin to skin, so I could clean up. And I clean myself up. And then he gets a bowl and a strainer from our kitchen. And we clean out the placenta, make sure, you know, everything's whole, everything was fine. And he's like, how do you feel? I was like, I feel great. You know, I feel good in the sense of as good as that one can feel after they birth. So he gets me my robe, and we go to the room to cuddle. At this point, my son he comes upstairs, and he's just like, he has this look of just like so much happiness to see this little baby brother. So it was another boy, and he sees his little baby brother, and he's just so happy. And then he's like, okay, so I don't want you to get mad, but I called Sabrina to come watch Grayson while you were in labor. And I was like, so that's why I heard the door. He was like, yeah, it was her coming in. And I was like, okay. So she comes upstairs, and she's, you know, standing there like, she can't believe this.
And who is this person?
So this was a friend that we had in Sicily that we had become close to, I guess, in the past year, because we had only been there for about not even a year, like 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
And she was basically our closest like couple friends, and her kids loved playing with our kids, but it was just her in the house because my husband thought we were going to need more help.
Mm-hmm.
And then she comes upstairs and she's standing in the bedroom, and after a while, like, I was ready to be alone.
Sure.
But, you know, she was like chatting, and I felt bad, like trying to kick her out. And then he comes with another news.
No!
And he's like, so I know you told me not to.
Oh my God.
And
what?
I really don't want you to get mad. But he's like, I waited at least an hour, but I called the ambulance.
What?
And I'm like, and I was like, why the hell did you call the ambulance?
Whoa.
He's like, I just want to make sure everything's okay. I was like, everything is okay. I was like, I'm okay. Baby's okay. He's like, yeah, but I just want to make sure. Like, I'm really worried right now. And I was just like, fine, Alex. Like, what am I supposed to do at this point? Like, you called them. They're coming.
Oh,
you know,
my
like,
God. Were you livid?
I was mad. But at the time, I was like, I was already enjoying my baby. And I was on such a high that I was like, I don't care. I already did it. Whatever.
Sure.
So they come, and I had one, that was when I originally wanted to do a Lotus birth with him. And they came and they were like, oh, well, you know, we need to cut the cord and whatever. And I, again, like, kind of just submitted. I was just like, okay, like, fine, cut the cord. Like, it was already white. So I was like, okay with it. But that's not what I wanted to do. So I still, like, have that in my heart. Like, that's not the way I wanted it to go. And, you know, they're checking him. And then they're like, well, everything obviously checked out fine. Baby was fine. And they didn't touch me, and I wasn't going to let them. Because the bases, the people who drive the ambulance are corpsmen, typically very lower ranking people, typically very, very young. These were kids. They look way younger than me. Like, they can be 18, 19, 20 years old driving these ambulances. And I was just like, yeah, they've probably never seen a birth in their life, have no idea what the hell is going on. Like, but they're here to tell me that my baby's
exactly.
Okay, you know?
Well, that's why it makes me so mad is like the ingrained, and I'm not trying to target your husband. It's so many people, so many men do this. The ingrained distrust in the normalcy of birth and of a woman saying she's fine, that therefore it's not logical that the people that he would quote unquote trust or turn to are these like dumbass young kids. Like, that doesn't, it just shows our, what's the right word? Our loyalty to the system.
Yeah. And of course, I'm irritated, sort of. Like, in between having the high of a birth, I'm like irritated because they're here like, oh yeah, baby's fine. And I'm sitting here like, yeah, dumbass, thanks. I need this, you know, an hour ago when I gave birth to him, like, he was fine. But I was like, for my husband's sake, like, what am I? And they're like, well, we really, really recommend you go to the hospital. I said, no. I said, I had my baby here because I didn't want to go to the hospital. I'm staying. And they're like, well, you need to sign this. And I said, I'll sign whatever you want, but I'm not getting on that ambulance with you. I was like, I'm staying here in my house. So they leave, and he's like, I'm sorry. I freaked out for a second, and I just had to call them. And I was like, but why? I was like, I still don't understand. Like, everything was fine. And my friend was still in the house at this point. So I kind of told my husband, like, hey, like, I'm ready to wind down. Like, you know, guests need to go. Like, I'm ready to just be with my baby and my family and nobody else. So she leaves. And she's still a very good friend of mine. I still see her often, but it was just a time that I didn't want anybody in my space. And so that was my first birth. And after that, so on day 2, after he was born, so he was born December 22nd. So this is around the holidays, all the craziness. They're like, you know, my husband's still like, you really need to take him to the hospital, all this. I don't know what was it, but I was like, you know what, if that's going to make you get off my back, you know, let's take him to the damn hospital. And I was mad because I could still barely walk. Like, I was still very sore, very raw. We go to the hospital, and of course everybody's like whispering. You hear the whispers because nobody had ever done this on this base where somebody just gave birth at home by themselves. Like, even it got all the way up to like the CO who runs the base, and everybody was just like, holy snap, your wife is crazy. But I get to the hospital and the doctor's like, so can you walk me through what happened? Like, did the baby come too fast? I was like, no, this was planned. I knew I was going to do this. And as soon as I said that, like his whole demeanor changed. And he's like, well, that was extremely irresponsible of you. You know, you could have died. Your baby could have died. I was like, yeah, here we are, nice, healthy, and alive. I said, not every woman is like me. And that's what pisses me off about the system. That was like, other women walk in there and they're going to crumble and they're just going to let it go, or, you know, or change their minds or whatever the case may be. And I said, because not every woman is strong enough to stand up for themselves and tell them, you know, screw you. I'm okay with my decision. So, you know, that doctor, you know, he starts blah, blah, blah. At that point, I had already like zoned him out. I was just looking at him and thinking about something else. I was like, you talk all you want. And, you know, they start offering, oh, so you're here to circumcise and vaccine, you know, the vitamin K, the ointment, this. I was like, no. I said, I didn't come here for any of that. I was like, you can take measurements. And that is as far as you're getting to touching my baby. And then you know, they offer the PKU, and my husband's like, you know, they say, oh, it's for this. And then my husband's like, please, let's really do this one. I was like, Alex, it's so unnecessary. Like, do you really need to do this test? And he's just like, yes, please. And I was like, that is the only test they're going to do. And while they were squeezing his foot, like the tears just started coming out of my eyes. And I'm just sitting there, and I was so mad. And the kid who was doing it, he's putting a gloved hand in his mouth to stop him from crying. Yeah. And now I'm irritated and I'm crying and I'm mad. And I was like, I'm never doing this again. I said, I am never bringing a child of mine back into the hospital for this. I said, do you hear me? I said, this is the last time we're doing this. I was like, do you know how mad I am right now? And like, he saw me, that I was sitting there like crying. Like I was broken over this. Like my baby's 2 days old. I'm still like so fresh on all this. And then after all that, like I told my husband, I was like, do you see why I did not want to step into that place? I said, because this was the same thing I didn't want to deal with during birth. Guess what? I don't want to deal with it after birth either. I said, I was in there fighting every single person in every room we walked into. And I didn't have to. I said, I could have just stayed at home.
Well, he didn't. Yeah. Like he didn't have your back. Like that's really, unfortunately, because I'm sure he's, of course, like a wonderful person and father and blah, blah, blah. But like, that's what that is. That is your man not having your back and questioning your decisions.
You're imposing your choices on me.
The whole point of free birth is that you are in charge. You are making the decisions and you are free to be.
Yes. So we go home and I was like, next baby, we're not stepping in the hospital at all. I said, I don't care how you feel or what you think the baby needs. Unless I think that the baby does need to get seen, we are not going into a hospital. I said, I'm not doing this again. I was like, we did the whole free birth thing and yes, that is what I wanted, but I also did not want to deal with this. That, that all sizzled down and whatever. And then I had friends like, oh, I watched the video because it's on YouTube. She didn't even suction the baby after it was born and all these things. And I'm just like, a little bit education goes a long way. But I just ignore the comments and what people were saying. And I was just like, I know what I did. I know I didn't do anything wrong. But here are people that, are ingrained in this. Babies need to be suctioned. Baby needs this. Baby needs that. Of course, baby doesn't need any of that unless you think they need it. Or there's a problem with breathing, but he came out screaming, crying. He was fine. So then on to our third.
So how long so now you've left Italy. You're back in the States.
We're still in Italy. We're still in Italy.
With your third pregnancy?
Yes. I was still in Sicily. I was there until I was 8 months pregnant.
Oh, okay.
So we're still in Italy. And we take a vacation to come to New York City and go to Dominican Republic for a month. I was going to Dominican Republic for a month. My husband 2 weeks because of work. He had to go back to work. So he had gone to Spain, Ibiza to play on a rugby tournament. And during that time that he left, he was gone for 4 days. I used the military. It's called Space Available. You basically fly for free back to the States. So I used the base to fly back to the States. and the flights only come out like 3 days before. So a flight popped up while he was gone. And I was like, hey, this is my window. I'm going to go. I'll see you in the States. And he's like, okay. So I left with the kids. So at this time, one of them is about 3.5 and the other one's about 1.5. And so I leave with the kids and everything, come back to the States. And then he comes and meets me here. And then we head to Dominican Republic. And while we were over there, we stayed at an all-inclusive. And they had daycare, and we had been leaving the kids. And we were having lots of fun, with that, and back in our bedroom. Lots of sex. And after, I think, 2 days, I said, I don't know if we're doing it too much or what. I was like, but I feel so irritated inside. I said, everything just hurts. I said, we need to, take it easy. I was like, maybe let's just twice a day right now. Well, I think
hold up. You were having sex twice a day?
It was more than twice.
Nice. Wow.
Because they had the daycare. And so we were doing
Say no more.
Yeah. So every 5 minutes we were back in the room, and I was just like,
that is impressive.
Hey. Looking back now, I think that's when I had implantation cramps, but I didn't know that at the time. So I'm still breastfeeding my 1.5-year-old. I've weaned both of my kids through my pregnancies because I get horrible aversion. To the point that I want to throw them across the room. And I feel like that is extremely unhealthy. So I wean them, and it's rough and I hate it, but I do it for myself. I was like, I need to be okay in the head when I'm breastfeeding them, and my aversion gets too bad. So we're having fun in our all-inclusive. Our vacation continues. He goes back to the States. I stay with my mother, and we go to this little, it was like a little Airbnb place, but people actually live there too. And it's up in the mountains. It's beautiful. It's very secluded, but it's nothing new, nothing fancy. It's very rundown, but I loved it because it's you're actually staying in the culture, in the land. And it felt great in Dominican Republic. And it doesn't have windows. So it's like bars from a jail for the windows. And then just screens to keep the bugs out. So you're actually exposed to the outdoor elements all day long. And I loved it. You feel like you're in the jungle. So I'm laying in my room one day breastfeeding, and I'm looking out the window and just enjoying the breeze and all those sounds from outside. And my nipples are just, they're feeling raw and weird. And I'm just like, maybe his latch is changing because he's getting teeth. By the third day, it finally clicked in my head. I was like, wait, I had this feeling once before. And I said, when I had this feeling before, I was pregnant. And I was like, crap.
You're like,
and
I was pregnant.
I started thinking back, and I was like, damn it, all of that fun we had.
He's really coming in strong with his 19%, let me say.
I said, you better go back to that doctor and tell him you were having a bad day. It was just like, oh man. And I don't want to tell my mom because, she gets a little too, and I was just like, I don't feel like dealing with all that energy right now. So we had some neighbors across from us that were from Canada, and they were staying there for 2 months, and they didn't have a car. My grandpa had lent me his pickup truck out in Dominican Republic so we could get around. So I told her, I was like, hey, if you ever want to go to the supermarket, let me know, we can go grocery shopping, and that way you don't have to worry about buses or how much you buy. And she's like, okay. She had told me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this opportunity to leave my mom with the kids here and go get a pregnancy test at the supermarket. So I go with them. I go to the pharmacy. It was 100 pesos, which is $2. Buy a pregnancy test. Go to the bathroom in the mall. And I take a test. And I'm like, as soon as it's the 2 pink lines start coming up. And I was like, oh, crap. I was like, I was right. So I took a to throw it away, and then I go upstairs to the food court, send it to my husband. I was like, and he calls me right away. He's like, what are you saying? I was like, what did the picture say? He's like, are you serious? I was like, yes. He's like, oh snap. He's like, okay.
You guys are going to you're going to get pregnant with your 15th baby, and he's still going to be like, wait, what?
Yeah. And he still wants more, where I was okay after the second. I was like, I'm done. I don't want any more babies. I'm so done. And then the third one. And now he's like, we still need the fourth. And I was like, fourth? I was like, I'm okay on 3. I really, really do want a fourth, but he works way too much.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So then we finish our vacation, and when we get back to New York, I did a little photo shoot with the kids with like t-shirts, like I'm a big brother, to give to my mom, because I did want to tell her before I left. So we told her before we left, and they're over the moon, so happy. And they're like, another baby? Yes, like babies are always a blessing. They're so good. Like the more babies, the better. And I was just like, okay. And I headed back to Sicily. We weren't supposed to be returning to the States till July 2018. Well, comes February, my husband was picking orders, which he should have also done a long time before then. But he had extended a year to stay into 2019. And we decided that it wasn't best for our family. I hated where we lived. I was very isolated. We lived about 30 minutes from the base, and most Americans did not ever want to drive outside of the base. So nobody would come to visit me. Like up on a mountainside. It was a beautiful house, beautiful views, everything. But I was by myself with 2 kids in this huge ass house all the time. And I was like, I started to feel like I was depressed. And at the time, it didn't even cross my mind that I was feeling that way. I just felt like I was constantly angry and like irritated at everything. And it was because I was alone and I wasn't happy where I was. And I just kept telling my husband, I was like, I can't have this baby here. I said, I cannot have this baby here. I said, I don't know what we're going to do. I was like, but I cannot give birth here. And he's like, well, go to your mom's. And I was like, no, I don't want to be in anybody else's space. And I said, that house is cluttered and crowded. I don't want to be there. Like, I want my own space, but I just don't want to do it here. I said, this house doesn't feel right. It feels so cold. And we did not have a good relationship with our landlord. And I think that was another reason, like the house just felt bad to me. I was like, I don't want to be here. And I just kept saying that. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. Like, I even reached out to the farm in Tennessee, and I was like, I will even go birth over there. Like, I will birth anywhere. And I was like, I will, rent a cabin from them and go birth over there. And, they tell me, no, we're all booked up for March. And I was just like, I wouldn't even really do that. I said, if a midwife ever tried to do anything, I would just be upset and angry that they're even touching me. I said, so what was I even thinking? I said, I need to free birth, but I need to figure out where and how am I going to do this? Because I'm already like 6-7 months pregnant. And I'm just like, I don't know. I was like, but we need to go back to the States somehow. February 7th or 8th, we had hard copy orders in hand saying that we were moving to Norfolk, Virginia. And I was over the freaking moon. Like, I truly believe in like law of attraction. And I feel like I attracted this into my life because I was like, I'm not doing this here. It's just not going to happen here. And when that happened, like, I still couldn't believe it. So we had 2 weeks to pack up our entire house and move our car from Sicily, Italy to Norfolk, Virginia. So it was very stressful, very ridiculous. Finally get back to the States. And of course, I have no want or need to establish care with an OB here because I already had stopped seeing my OB.
Right.
Well, I had the most predominant labor with this baby that I've ever had. Like, usually my other 2 were very straightforward. Once contractions started, I had a baby. Well, with this one, for weeks, I was having a lot of Rex and Hicks. Sometimes they were even getting very painful or uncomfortable. And the last few weeks, there was, I think, twice where I thought I was in labor and I wasn't. And that had never happened to me before. So I was confused, and I'm just like, I'm going to stay pregnant forever. I was like, this baby isn't going to come. Like, I know I'm going to be pregnant for like 47 weeks or something. I started down because my first child was born, they say 39-1, and my second 38. And I know that those numbers really don't mean anything, but in my head, I'm going to have another baby around 38 weeks. Well, 38 weeks wrote around nothing. 39 weeks wrote around nothing. And I'm just like, okay. I had once texted my photographer thinking that it was showtime. And I said, oh, I'm not sure. I think it might be it. But it wasn't. So we leave it at that. And it was like about a week later, I think I messaged her again. Yeah, it was about a week later. So it was that night before my husband and I had sex. And I woke up again around 4 a.m. And I usually, at that point in labor or pregnancy, I don't feel like having sex or doing anything, but I wake up feeling very touchy and I start rubbing up on him, and he wakes up all like, okay, you know, like he's always ready to go. And he's like, this is different. And I was like, yeah, I know, I don't know. And I was like, I'm feeling good right now. So we have sex again. And then we lay down I had gone to the bathroom, cleaned up, come back, lay down, just go to sleep. Well, as I'm laying on my side, I feel like there's a lot of fluid coming out from me. And I'm just like, I hate when this happens. I was like, I swear I had like cleaned up, but I was like, now I'm like dripping everywhere. I was like, hand me my tank top that's on the floor. And I'm like wiping myself. And as I'm wiping, I just feel more and more coming out. I was like, okay, this is getting ridiculous. I said, I'm going to go to the bathroom and shower again. So I go to the bathroom and I sit down to pee first. And as soon as I spit, I hear a bloop. And I was like, oh, let me turn on the light. And I turn on the light, and it was my mucus plug. Like everything had come out. And I was like, oh, it's showtime. I said, I'm in labor. And he's like, how do you know? And I said, I just lost my entire mucus plug in the bathroom. So he comes in to see, and I text my photographer right away. And then I was like, let me just call her. It's 5 a.m. She's probably asleep. So I call her and she picks up, and I was like, yeah, I've been having, you know, I was like, contractions are started, you know, it's time. And she's like, okay, let me get the kids ready. Cause she had 2 children, and she said that her babysitters were always like canceling on her. And I said, if anything happens, just bring the kids. I said, I'd rather have you here than not.
Yeah.
You know, we'll entertain your kids. We have 2 older kids too. I said, it'll be fine. Just bring your kids. And she's like, you sure? I was like, I'm positive. Just bring your kids. So I continued to just labor in my bathroom, and cleaning the tub and getting everything ready. And I told my husband to put some water to boil because our heater tank only holds so much hot water. And then my photographer texts me and asks me, so how far apart are your contractions? And I didn't know because I wasn't timing them. So I downloaded a timer, start timing them. And I didn't know till afterwards. They had been 2 minutes apart, but they were, to me, like I could handle them. It didn't feel overwhelming yet or anything. I had no idea they were that close already. And I'm thinking, you know, we're going to be here another 5, 6, 7 hours or, you know, something of the sort. So I'm just relaxing, taking my time. And I finally get into the bathtub, and she arrives about an hour after I called her. So it's about 6 a.m. now. And I want to say we chat for about 20 or 30 minutes. And I just hit a point where I couldn't talk anymore. And I just lowered my eyes and I stopped talking to her. And she just sat there quietly. Like she already knew, like, there was no more talking to be happened. Mm-hmm. And my husband's coming in and out of the bathroom because he keeps checking on her kids. So I asked him, I was like, why do you keep coming in and out? He said, because I'm helping the kids. I said, no, you don't need to help the kids. I said, you need to be here with me. I said, stop coming in and out. You're getting my head out of this space. And he's like, okay. So after that, he just sits with me and he doesn't leave again. Well, the waves keep rocking my body, and I like feeling myself when I'm in labor. So I just check to feel the water, like the bags of water and everything, not necessarily for dilation. I just like to feel the baby coming down. And I feel myself opening so fast, and I'm like, this is insane. Like I've never opened this fast before. But I still think that I have another 3-4 hours to go. Well, 30 minutes later, baby was born.
Oh my God.
It was 5 by 7:01. Baby was here, or I think it was like 7:10. It was something like that, but it was very fast. It was 2 hours. It was my quickest labor yet. But I just remember when she was crowning, I think her head came out halfway, not all the way, because I felt a pain like nothing before, and I felt like she was stuck, and my contractions stopped. So I felt like her head came out and like it stopped, and I was still in pain. And usually you get like to the neck, and it feels like a little bit of relief before the body comes out. Well, I just felt the pain the whole time. And I was trying to breathe and not push. But at that point, my body's just like, push. And I remember I flailed, like I stood up and I tried to stand. And I was like, no, that hurts even more. And I back down into the water. And I was just like, oh my goodness, hold on tight. And then like right there, her whole body just like sprung out of me. We were in the bathtub. I was in the bathtub. So I had a water birth, and I could see her mouth opening as I brought her up from the water. She was already crying. And it was the most amazing birth I've had so far, because it was everything felt so comfortable and so good. And I was in a place where I was happy and just there to bother me. And nobody was there that I didn't know or want to be there. And my mom was asleep. My children were asleep. Like everything worked out with other people being there. And afterwards we went to the bedroom and we just relaxed. And by this time my husband was, okay with it. So no called and no hospital visits.
Good.
Where she still hasn't seen a doctor or been anywhere. And she's 4 months old now. So this was definitely like the birth that I wanted. I was like, the one thing I would definitely do different if I were to have another baby is no hospitals ever. Yeah. Like no visits, no prenatals, none of that. And
right. Yeah. I was kind of surprised that with the third, you still kind of went down that route. I definitely, it sounds like you are primed and ready to have a wild pregnancy next time.
Yes, I am. I totally am. That I will never go down that route again. And yeah. I really don't know why I did the third time around.
Well, I think it's one of those things that's like, it's just harder to resist in some ways. And even if you're kicking yourself while doing it, it's like,
yeah, I'm excited. Like I said, I feel like there's a fourth in our future for sure. And I'm totally going the whole wild pregnancy. I said no OBs, no doctors, no visits, none of that. Totally. I said I don't want to do any of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will replay this for you if you need a reminder.
Oh, I'm set.
Yeah, I know. I hear it. That's really cool. That's exciting. And so your little girl's 4 months-ish?
Yes, she's 4 months now.
And then, yeah, I mean, your photos went a little viral with the third one with the daughter.
Yes. I've seen them on a few pages now, a few Instagram accounts.
Yeah. And I just, it's cool. I love the nakedness of it. It's like you mentioned with the sports bra, it's like really common to see in the photos to have a sports bra or something. And that was what really struck me about yours. I mean, they're beautiful in a lot of other ways too, but I love that you are fully naked and just the rawness of that is so cool.
It feels so good. It feels different, to have something on your skin. Totally. And then have to take, I just remember like having to take it off with the second. It was like, oh, wait, I'm about to drop a baby,
Totally.
Like trying to hold a brand new wet baby and like trying to take off my bra. It was like the worst thing ever.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome. Well, badass. I love that you kept your fire through the whole thing. And, yeah, it's cool because I've seen your photos and I've actually seen the whole gallery. So I can, I'm like, I can envision that third birth so clearly with having gotten to see whatever that was, like 100 of those photos or something. Awesome.
But I hope more women get in tune with their fire and tell those spouses to take a seat and let them on the show.
Seriously, take a seat. I know. And yeah, because I mean, that is part of what I'm hearing in your story is you didn't use the word regret. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like these unnecessary things that you didn't feel good about, it wasn't in your highest power to do these things, and yet you did them anyway. And and that's one of the many. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say it's trying to please someone else when I feel like you should only be trying to please yourself
and your baby.
Yeah, yourself and your baby. I'm like, if something doesn't sit right with you, there's a reason for it. Like, don't go against it.
Yeah.
And I feel like I see enough of that.
And we are in a patriarchy, right? So we can never forget that. Not that we do, but like that we are conditioned and expected to do what our husbands say and to care about and to not be the sole decision makers of our body and our baby. So it's a lot of like deprogramming that it sounds like you're doing and that you've done, which is exciting.
Definitely.
All right, girlfriend. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It was awesome.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Freebirth podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.